Do leaders lie to us? I received an email just recently, and the person raised an important question. And the question was, if it is part of a leadership job, if it is part of a leader's position, if it is part of a leader's occupation, that sooner or later they need to lie to get along with something to be able to do their job properly. So at first it was a really difficult email, and of course I'm not going to discuss that case here, but the question was very good, and what I really liked about the email was that although it was a really difficult situation in which this organization is, the email was very factual. So thank you very much, the person who wrote this email to me for sure is listening right now. Do leaders lie to us? Is it part of a leader's job, or are you in the situation that sooner or later you have to lie when you are in a leadership position? And it is quite complicated when we look at different aspects of the question. Of course, first we're going to look at what happened last week, and then we're going to look at the problem, and then we look at how to do it better. So what happened recently? As you see, the numbers and case numbers of the pandemic are getting better and better due to vaccination having a process and having their place in society, which is very good. So let's hope that this will be even better in the very near future. However, when we look at the situation and what happened before the pandemic broke out, Dominic Cummings, former advisor to Boris Johnson, former advisor to the UK government, said that Boris Johnson planned herd immunity in the first place beginning of 2020. That's what the Evening Standard reported. Boris Johnson said that he always wanted the best for the UK people, of course. However, herd immunity simply means you simply wait and see how many people will be infected with the global pandemic, and then you will simply see that as many people as possible get through it, and afterwards you reach herd immunity, which makes the virus die out. However, the main issue is that, of course, the healthcare system will be overwhelmed and most likely many people will die. Did Boris Johnson lie to the public? Another case, as you now know, in many countries, the football season is over. In Germany, it just ended. Some clubs started with very high expectations, and then they ended up with a reality which was completely different. Did these managers, did these CEOs, did these chairmen of these football clubs lie to us? Did they know that the season is going to be a lot harder? Did they lie to the fans? And maybe you remember that just a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the European Super League, and it was condemned by FIFA that there will be no breakaway league. However, according to the New York Times, FIFA officials, this is not even surprising anymore. FIFA officials, before the European Super League was announced, FIFA officials met the people who wanted to run the European Super League, and they talked about if FIFA is going to endorse the project. However, they didn't agree on how they could get along, and then FIFA condemned the project at the end. However, you can't meet with people in the first place and say you want to promote their project, and at the end, just because you didn't get your terms, then condemn the project. Of course, there might be many reasons. The question is, did FIFA officials lie to us? Another case, in the UK, you now have Great British Railway, a project which is going to create one train system, and this project is going to solve the issue of a privatized train system which didn't perform as well as it should. The franchise idea was probably a good idea in the first place, however, execution was poor. When you ever been to the UK, for example, in London, and you wanted to go somewhere in the UK where you realized you have to go with many different rail networks which often did not communicate properly with each other, and that ended up with a massive problem. Timetables which didn't fit the needs of the people, delays with trains, refunds not being processed, and a very high-priced train system, way more expensive than comparable services all over Europe. Of course, the Conservative Party, and of course my personal bias here, you will find myself in the liberal conservative area. I'm in favor of less regulation and a low tax state, but all to a reasonable amount. And it's normal that conservative parties are not in favor of nationalization. However, it was now Boris Johnson and his government announcing that Great British Railway will take over all train system. So nationalization by a conservative party. Did the government lie to us in the first place? One aspect which I had to realize myself, and that is now more than 10 years ago, actually not more than 15 years ago. I worked for a large franchise, a learning partner of a large software company, and the owner of that learning company said, if anyone, any trainer from their network gets to the top 10 in the world, they will go to the annual conference, which was a huge conference, parties, really a great time. And once I reached that top 10 position together with another colleague, we went to the international conference and had a great time. And the year after, one female colleague went top 10 as well. However, she did not go to the conference with us, which means me and my male colleague, we both went to the international conference. The female colleague was not taken aboard. The female colleague did not go to the conference. And when I asked the leader of that company why that happened, he said he always had the feeling that this female trainer made him look a bit stupid, so he didn't want to have her around. Did that person lie to us in the first place? So the main question here is, are we always talking about a lie as soon as issues arise? And when we now look into the problem, it is very important to distinguish in the first place, what are we talking about? Because as soon as you accuse someone of being a liar, that is a very strong accusation. When you're wrong with it, it will be held against you for a very good reason. You cannot accuse someone of being a liar, especially when you have no proof and no evidence. So one part of the problem is, are we really talking about a lie? Or is it a misunderstanding, for example? Look at the facts. It's your burden of proof. You have to prove that a person lied to you, and it cannot be based on simply hearsay or any evidence which you only heard about but cannot present. It cannot be based on emotions or feelings. Factual aspects of the questions always have to be at our center of attention. So always look at, is it a lie or, for example, a misunderstanding? Another aspect of the problem could be that someone is simply incapable of doing the job. And unfortunately, we all know that when someone gets hired only due to a personal contact, let's say, well, some people call it networking, some people call it unfair advantage. And when you talk about these kind of insider deals, someone gets hired only because they know someone, that normally is a very poor choice for the job, and the job will then not be done. It's not lying when someone does something wrong, when they're simply incompetent. So you have to distinguish between incompetence and a lie. When, for example, someone doesn't like someone else and due to sympathy or antipathy decide in favor or against them, it's not a lie. It is, of course, unacceptable behavior, it is immoral, it is unethical, but it is not lying. The main issue, however, is always that leaders think they can get away with that, with either so-called misunderstandings or incompetence or straightforward lies. Leaders think that they can get away with it due to one aspect. Other people got away with them before. Other people got away with not saying the full truth or not looking at the facts correctly in the first place. And because other people got away with it, you easily create a culture of where you think leaders are a bit untouchable, a bit above the law, and they are slightly different and a bit more privileged than other people in the organization, which very quickly gives people the feeling of inequality is what we actually accept in this organization. And of course, people will lose trust, and we have a special guest with us today at the end for the interview session. And this person, the guest we have, Sean Weafer, is going to talk about trust. Great interview with him. So stay tuned until the very end. Of course, when we now talk about, you have different issues with leaders, with their way of how they communicate and maybe how they look at facts and how they communicate the facts. There are different aspects of what you could do. You could do training, or you could hire speakers for your events who talk about how to communicate properly. There are coaching ideas or consulting projects which you could do with your leaders. There, of course, are mentoring programs, or you get someone in from project or interim management. And I'm happy to talk with you about that. That's what I do professionally. However, just one other important aspect. When people are looking for articles and besides this podcast, I also have an article published every week, and the article of this week is about Do Leaders Lie to Us? Some people went to the leadership magazine which I run, and they found out when they read a couple of articles, suddenly medium.com, that's the largest platform in the world for social journalism, and that's where my magazine is hosted, they start to ask for money after you read a couple of articles. You can get all the articles for free when you sign up at expert.nb-networks.com, so expert.nb-networks.com. When you sign up there, you not only get every Wednesday an email where you get all the links straight to your inbox, it's also 100% focused on the content and completely advertising free. So it's 100% ad free, and you get all the articles and everything for free. Feel free to sign up. So, of course, now we have to look at how can we do better when it comes to leaders not acting properly. So, first, of course, you need a better communication culture. You need a better culture of conflict. How to do that? So, aspect number one, the career has to be based on facts, not based on a network. If you only hire people due to their background, which often people say, it is often a random criteria which you quote, which you reference, or simply a personal preference which you take as a reason to hire or not hire someone. When you hire someone only due to the university they come from, when you hire someone only due to the region they come from, when you hire someone only due to, let's say, a certain interest you have in common, so you know someone from going to the football stadium, you can of course do that. It is just not a smart way to hire. We have to end the kind of folklore we see here, this folkloristic approach to management and leadership. I'll just give you an example. One very well-known football club in Germany, the FC Schalke 04, a very well-known football club being in the first league, Bundesliga from an English point of view. One of the best leagues in the world. They have been in the Bundesliga forever, but this year they were relegated with a horrible season where they nearly lost every single game. And when they were deep in crisis, suddenly someone says, oh, we now have a former player on the board. That's someone who stands for our values. That's someone who really knows how this club works. That's someone who really knows what the morals and ethics of this club are. This is not a way to hire. You cannot expect that people can do their job well based on an emotion or based on a feeling. The difference between being a good football player, which means being good in sports, and running a club, which is nothing else than economically driven business unit, highly focused on profitability in an extremely competitive environment, is simply that the skills you need are completely different. I know what you refer to. You try to convey a certain feeling that people say, oh, all these managers and all these CEOs and chairmen, they are all out of touch. And now we get someone who comes from the football pitch straight to the manager's seat or straight to the chairman's seat. This is not how it works. Just imagine when you are in a production company and you say, for example, that someone who can deal with a certain kind of metal very well suddenly can sit in the chairman's seat because they did so well somewhere in the production plant, or vice versa, because someone is a good chairman, they are a good worker in the production hall, in the production facilities. You know that this is not going to work. Skills are different, and you have to focus on a sustainable approach to how do we evaluate skills? How do we look at facts? It might sound horribly Northern German because it might be like that. You have to look at the facts and not at your network and the emotions connected to it. So it is very important that, and this is aspect now number 3, you have to directly talk about issues but based on facts. Because when you start the conversation based on emotion, so for example, when a leader does something wrong, but the leader has done a good job for many years, you cannot say, oh, someone did a great job for years, because it might be irrelevant when the wrongdoing is really severe. I just give you an example. KPMG, I criticized them a lot during the last weeks, but when they removed their chairman due to the fact that this person said unconscious bias doesn't exist, which is a highly discriminatory statement against people who might be affected by unconscious bias, and science has proven that unconscious bias exists, KPMG removed that person because KPMG wants to say, we respect science. We focus on facts. And when someone says a scientifically proven fact doesn't exist, this person cannot be the chairman anymore. And that was exactly the right move to do, especially in this situation. So to have a better approach to facts, the third aspect is you have to speak about it directly, but based on a factual level, not based on the emotional level. Aspect number 4 of how to do it better is you have to be sure that you don't ignore people based on a random fact. So I'll just give you an example. Someone complains to a senior manager about an issue in the production facilities they have. The manager, however, then ignores the complaint because it is only a worker who says that maybe they should just focus on their work and stop complaining. And that's exactly the wrong way how to deal with a complaint. You cannot ignore a complaint due to a level of education, due to a background, a race, an ethnicity, or language skills, or based on the hierarchical pyramid. When someone raises an issue and you ignore the complaint, they will talk to someone else about the issue. And if you're not very lucky, they will talk to the press, they will talk to social media, and you have a PR issue, and you have the whole conflict in public. So be sure that you never ignore a complaint, but approach the complaint proactively, again, on a fact-based approach. And last but not least, when you see a wrongdoing, you really have to act. I just give you an example of how it should not be. There was an offense in one organization about the travel guidelines they had. And the offense was that someone booked a business class flight instead of an economy class flight, while for short flights, it clearly says we only book economy flights. And we have someone from the operational sales team doing it wrong, and we had someone from the senior leadership team doing it wrong. The salesperson was fired, the senior leader stayed. And that's exactly how you cannot deal with conflict. If you want to look at, do leaders lie, or is it just a misunderstanding? Is it incompetence? Is it something we can correct afterwards? You cannot have double standards in your organization. However, many people do have double standards in their organization. And that, again, will be a massive trust issue. So when you look at these facts, and thank you very much for listening to me up to this point, we now have to look at when leaders do not really perform as they should, how do you gain their trust? How can you be a high trusted advisor? And I am very happy that today we have someone here with Sean Weafer, who's a senior expert, a senior consultant who spent years and years with his business focusing on the factor of trust. So of course, thank you very much for listening to me up to this point, and I wish you all the best to implement the steps I mentioned in your organization. However, now we go straight to the interview. If you have any aspects where you like to talk about with me, then just drop me an email, nb@nb-networks.com. But now there's enough talk from me. It is now time to talk to someone about the issues of trust we have in today's leadership world. I'm sure you will really enjoy it. And here we start with the interview. Trust in today's times is more important than ever. The question is, how do you lead your teams? How do you win clients in a hybrid age when you can't meet them on site? Maybe even in the future, some clients will not be interested in talking with you on site because everything might go virtual or remote, as most people say. And we have an expert here about that today. Hello and welcome, Sean Weafer.
Hello, Niels. Lovely to be here.
Thank you very much for taking the time, but I'm getting straight into the topic. You wrote the book, The High Trusted Advisor, and one major claim of the book is that trust is no longer enough. What do you mean with trust is no longer enough?
Yeah, I think if we go back to the early 2000s, where we had a massive crisis of trust in the economy, with banks and the financial system, and then that spilled over into religions, faith-based organizations, into government and so on, we can see there's been a general decrease in trust in what were considered the institutions in the past. And the same thing in a business environment. I think what's happened is that there are different levels of trust in our relationships. So you might know someone, you might like someone, but you may not trust them enough to share everything with them. Whereas there are other people that you like, know, and trust so much so that there are no hesitations, no reservations, no restrictions whatsoever. You put everything on the table and say, here's everything I have, right? And that's what you might call a high level of trust with people. And I think in today's world, when we're dealing with a world with mass distraction, more limited attention, where we're operating in a hybrid situation where we're more remote from people than ever before, it's critical for us as leaders, if we want to lead our teams to influence outcomes, or as sales professionals, to build these high levels of trust with people. And the way you recognize a high level of trust, for example, if you're a salesperson, is somebody comes to you, like a client comes to you with a proposal they've received from someone else, and they give it to you and ask you to quote on that piece of proposal. That's because they want to do business with you. They have a much higher degree of trust with you than they have with anybody else. And the same in a leadership situation. If somebody are prepared to come in with you and share what's going on, and look for support, look for assistance with proposals or concepts or projects, it means that their belief in you, their faith in you, their trust in you is higher than they have in anybody else. And that is fundamental in order to how we lead teams and how we win and retain clients in this new hybrid world, to build these significant levels of trust, these high levels of trust, hence the highly trusted advisor.
Very well said. One aspect when I read your book was that, because let's face it, many people say you have to be relevant to the market, you have to solve problems. So it's always about problems and relevance. And you used a term which I think you created, and it's compelling relevance. What is special about compelling relevance compared to just being relevant?
I think where this relates to is a situation where a lot of I work with a lot of financial experts and technical experts, as well as with sales teams and sales leaders. And there's a tendency for us to deliver our expertise. This is what we do. This is what happens. This is what our company does, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very me-centric, or it's very company-centric. The problem is that what it's not doing is demonstrating the value that the person is getting from us by means of the fact that we do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So let me give you an example of what I mean. Let's use a very typical situation. If you ask sales teams, they talk about, we have USPs, unique selling points, right?
Yeah.
The only issue with unique selling points is there's absolutely nothing unique about them. Okay. There's a pretty good chance that every other industry is saying the same thing, et cetera, et cetera. And it would be the same thing if we were making pitches or presentations as a leader within our organization. So what we have to do, there's almost, if I use a USP, like we're a one-stop shop, for example, which is not that uncommon actually, right? There's an assumption that you as the client should work out what that means to you. Okay.
Yeah, like one-stop shop with a one face to the customer approach, which is streamlined in the whatever cloud solution for the client. And you think, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So when you get that, Niels, what I try to indicate to people, look, here's the thing. People are distracted. They've got a lot going on. They're stressed. There's a degree of low-level anxiety. They're more remote than ever before. Please don't make them work any harder than they have to. Tell them what that does for them. Right? So make it compelling, make it relevant. And how do you do that? Because the question the person who's listening to you is asking is, so what? What does that do for me? Don't make me work it out. I haven't got the time. I haven't got the interest, right? The reality is, in modern business, nobody cares unless you make them care. So to give you an example of it, the way you'd reinterpret that is you would say something like, we're going to save you a significant amount of time and effort and inconvenience because you make one call and you get a result, simply because we're a one-stop shop. So you tell them the value. Another example of that would be, I was working with a legal firm who had to go through a presentation to a general counsel in an organization. They were pitching for some business, and there've been multiple legal firms in there ahead of them. And I asked them, what's your USP? What is it that makes you stand out? And they say, well, that's easy. We give you access to our senior partners. And I said, fair enough. So what? What does that do for me? Right. And
my first idea would be, when I get access to the senior partners, I'm going to end up with a higher bill.
That's a good point, right? But if you take the concept, you've got to look at where the person's at. So you've got a general counsel. He or she has got a lot of decisions to make. It's a very important, responsible role. They've got a lot of stress. They got a little time. They have to make a decision about who to work with. So what I coach these guys to do is, what you're going to do when you walk in and they ask you, tell me about yourself. They say, well, what we're going to do, Mr. and Ms. General Counsel, is we're going to help you make faster, more reliable legal decisions every time, because we give you access to our senior partners. It's the first bit that compels, not the second bit. The first bit is when you're selling to their heart, their emotions, which ultimately drive 90% of our decisions, according to Cranfield University. And the other bit is the logic, which justifies the first bit in the first place. So a point of compelling relevance is you got to create the value, and then you got to justify it with logic.
Brilliant. So what do you think when we talk about highly trusted advisors? And we know that advisors have normally C-level trust. However, we often realize, and especially people who are new in the industry, they wonder, how do I get the access? And often they found out people have a certain network, often driven by same university, same upbringing, sometimes family connections. What is my chance when I want to become a highly trusted advisor? What are the networking aspects I have to take care of to get this kind of access? Because let's face it, not everyone is in the same position to start out with a good network from their family.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it depends on the situation. I mean, if you're dealing with a leader in an organization, particularly expert in finance leaders who are usually very, very competent in what they do, but often they do not get acknowledged. They have an assumption that because I do a good job, people will recognize me and they'll reward me. That's not what happens. That's not the reality of leadership in corporations or organizations. You have to play what I call the game, right? And the game is you'll get to a certain level in an organization where 4 Ps now come into play. You've got to build a profile. Okay, so what are you? What do you stand for? You've got to position that profile, then you'll get promoted, and then you manage the politics, right? So if you're talking about an executive in an organization, what's critically important for him or her is the ability to expand their, what we call credibility presence, their executive presence, the fact that they're heard and they're seen by other people speaking on their behalf. That gets them introduced into rooms that they otherwise wouldn't get into. That would have people talking about them in terms of who mightn't have spoken about them before. And this is what allows them to start getting the access that you're talking about. There are about 5 fundamental skill sets in a highly trusted advisor as a leader. There's one additional one around the sales. I'll talk about that in a second. 1, you've got to be able to network effectively and do it in a professional manner that's ethical and engaged with the other person. 2, you've got to be able to recognize and work and flex your behavior to work with many different types of personalities. 3, you've got to be able to utilize questions and influencing skills in order to engage and influence people rather than simply direct and command. 4, you've got to be able to present like a professional. That means not a presentation, but a conversation, a facilitation that engages the people. And 5, you've got to be able to manage your professional boundaries, know who your primary stakeholders are and how to manage those relationships to get the best result and best productivity out of the hours that you have in your day. These are the 5 fundamentals for a highly trusted leader or advisor as a leader. The additional piece that would go to that if you're a sales team or a sales leader is mindset, motivation, and the messaging piece, which we just talked about in the ability to create points of compelling relevance. So it's defining credibility, and then it's about being proactive to build a profile, what you stand for, position it, get promoted, and manage the politics, which is really just about managing everyday relationships.
Brilliant. One aspect which specifically caught my attention, because when of course I looked at the table of contents, you first flip through the book and then you think what might be interesting, and then you see one chapter is named, and I quote word by word, "Learning to Love Objections." I mean, who on planet Earth loves objections?
Well, to be fair, I love objections. So maybe I'm weird, but I do, and I'll tell you why. It's a little like if I get an objection for somebody, if I get pushback to my proposal, my idea, my sales presentation, whatever, it means the person's engaged in the process. What they're really interested in, well, justify what you're saying to me. Show me the value. They're engaging with you. They're asking if you like what's going on. So you know that if you're getting objections, you're part of a process, and it's a process you can manage. It's a process you can engage with. And really it's down to, am I communicating in the right way that this individual understands? Do I understand the compelling relevance for this individual? Can I align a price with this? Whatever it happens to be, whatever the pushback is. Because even as leaders, if you're making pitches for proposals, you're going to get pushback internally for your projects as much as you would as a sales professional. So as long as they're objecting, they're involved in the process. I mean, even when they say no, that's just an objection, because underneath that is the real reason, right? What I can't work with, so that's why I love objections. What I can't work with, if somebody's just indifferent to what I'm saying, they don't care.
Mm-hmm.
They're not interested. If I get a situation like that, I know as a leader, that's not a stakeholder that I'm ever going to win over. So I need to find other people. If I'm a salesperson, I know that's not a person I'm ever going to sell to. So thank them for the time, move on.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I remember
so that's
that
what I mean.
I remember that just recently, that when I listened to a speech from a former FBA hostage negotiator, and he said a no is so much more useful than a yes, because when people in these situations where you want something from them without any pressure say yes, you most likely missed something really important which will haunt you later. Would you agree with that?
I think that's a good point. I think often people can commit to a yes because it's easy to roll away from. It's easy to back away from or break a promise or break a commitment. When they say no, they're giving that kind of obstruction. They're giving that kind of resistance, which means they're engaged, right? Whereas if you overcome that resistance and you give them a justification and then they say yes, they're much more committed to the outcome.
Brilliant. Of course, one aspect you also mentioned in your book is how to manage your time professionally. As a German, that of course is a topic which I love, because managing time is what we do all day long. So what do you think are the most common mistakes, errors, wrong steps people do when they manage their time?
I think, first of all, they try to manage time. My old mentor, Dr. Dennis Waitley, once said that you can't manage time. Time management's a fallacy. You can't make an hour longer than it is. You can't bring yesterday back into today. He said, but if you work out how to do that, let me know. We'll make a lot of money, right? So the point he was making, which is absolutely true, and people, they confuse themselves by saying they're trying to manage time. Really, what you're trying to manage is your focus, right? What you do and why it's important for you to do it. And then within that, it really boils down to personal organization. So are you scheduling time for reflection during the week that allows you to get on top of things? Are you reacting rather than proacting? I think the two primary mistakes, if you just want to tie down to two, that I come across all the time in my coaching is, one, people don't understand who their critical stakeholders are. And as a result of that, they tend to say yes to people they should be saying no to. Right. So I talk about MND. So who are your must-see stakeholders? Who are the people who are fundamentally directly related to your performance appraisals or your potential promotion? They're must-see. Then the N is nice to see people. When you've looked after all the must-see people, have you time to build relationships with people who can speak well of you, give you opportunities, initiate relationships that are of value to you? And then the last one is D, which is delegate or defer, which means you shouldn't be speaking to those because you're too senior for them. They should be going to somebody else. Right. And then that's all a question of then how do you handle that? How do you manage pushback on that? And the other piece is, so the M&D element is the important. So the stakeholder management, the professional boundary management is important. And then the other piece is the ability to push back, the willingness to say no. Right. That's hard for some people because they want to seem to be of value. They want to be of service. And I understand that. But the reality is that you need to learn how to push back in order to make space enough for what you do to ensure that you're showing your performance, your delivery for the organization. So learning to say things like, have you spoken to John about that? Or, Mary's the best person to talk about that. Why don't you speak to them first and then come to me? And what happens is that lack of boundary management, the lack of ability to push back, often means that people are dealing with lots of people they shouldn't be talking to. And it leaches their time and it leaches their ability to be productive. And so they move from proactive state to reactive state. And that takes up an enormous amount of executive time in terms of what people are doing.
Brilliant. When we now look at the world of advisors, consultants, trainers, coaches, anyone in this industry, many people expect that it is hard to get into because so many people try to get influence in this world. And now the world suddenly turned digital. In your book, you also talk about how to be an influencer and how to get influence in the digital world. And of course, when you read the word influencer, you suddenly think of all these coaches posting selfies on Instagram, which I hope is not what you're talking about.
No, I think, first of all, just so we're clear, when I'm not talking about consultants and coaches and trainers, I'm talking about the fact that a leader or a salesperson in a professional role needs to be seen as an advisor. And that's what I talk, and that's what the book is all about. It's not designed for professionals who are coaches, consultants, or whatever. It's designed for people in organizations who have leadership roles or management roles, or for people who are professional sales executives, account managers, and business developers. And the best way to explain that is that there is a tendency in traditional management to be directive and command and control in your focus. In a hybrid world where you're working and trying to lead people at a distance, that's much more hard, that's much more difficult. So what you have to do is become an advisor, a supporter, a person, and this is a new definition of leadership, which I think is very relevant, is creates the environment in which your people can excel. And to do that, it's about being an advisor. It's about being a supporter. It's about being of service. And in a sales capacity, it's exactly that as well, because the original meaning of selling is to be of service. If you want to be successful in sales, simply find out the problems your clients have, find a solution, and then monetize it. It's not rocket science, but it's that advisor capacity. And the best way to explain it, Niels, is that whenever I work with a sales team or business development team or anywhere in the world, one of the things I ask them is can you define or give me the stereotypical words associated with a salesperson? And they'll say things like,
pushy, salesy.
Thank you. We can treat this as a therapy session. You can get this off your chest. I understand your challenges. And that's it. But that's exactly it, right? That's exactly what they say. And then I say, well, no wonder you get nervous about going to speak to clients because this is you, right? So then I say, well, give me the words you associate with being an advisor. And then it's a very different scenario. It's trusted as one of the first of the three, expert, a guide, a mentor. That massively changes our perception about how we should function as leaders and how we should function as sales professionals, not as command and control individuals, not as pitchers and pushers, but as advisors. People who are valued, people who become the go-to person that our clients or that our colleagues and our stakeholders automatically look for to work with, to allow us the opportunity to get access to accomplish our corporate goals or our personal professional goals or our career goals. So it's that concept rather than the concept of somebody who's external as a consultant, although obviously they need to learn those skills as well.
Excellent. And of course, now the question of all questions, when is the book going to be available?
The book is available now, so you can get it as an ebook or as a hard copy. When I say hard copy, I mean, so paperback.
Physical book.
Yeah, exactly. Physical book. It's available now on Amazon, but there's a number of other platforms it's available on as well. Ingram, Sparks, and various others. But I suppose the easiest if you just simply go to Amazon, wherever your local regional Amazon is, .com.co.uk.de or whatever, and just type in the highly trusted advisor and bam, there you go.
Brilliant. These are perfect final words for this podcast. So at the end, there's only one thing for me left to say. Sean, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you, Niels.